Hi, this is Dorie Clark. I am here with Newsweek's weekly live interview show, Better, and our special guest this week is Rachel Sussman. Rachel is a Tony Award-nominated Broadway producer. She teaches at Columbia University's School of the Arts, and she has been involved in many fantastic presentations and shows that you will see on Broadway that you've seen, including What the Constitution Means to Me. She's currently involved with Thoughts of a Colored Man, which is intending, fingers crossed, a imminent Broadway run when Broadway reopens. And Rachel, we're so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Dorie. I'm honored to be here.
Well, thank you. And for everyone who's tuning in live, please feel free to type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you are tuning in from. We look forward to taking your questions for Rachel as the interview progresses. Rachel, the first question that I have for you, we are going to be talking today about identifying and nurturing creative projects. You are a creative producer. And one of the questions that I have, which I think is always one of the most interesting aspects of theatrical presentations, and also to tell the truth, there's a lot of business parallels with startups and things like this. Oftentimes a show, a concept, an idea starts out, and to tell the truth, it's actually not very good. But then over time, it sometimes becomes something very different and becomes something very good. And so I would love to hear your thoughts. How do you go about identifying whether there is a worthy seed inside something? How do you know if it's just a bad idea, period, or if it is not a good idea yet?
That's such a good question, Dorie. I feel like so often there are projects that are not quite ready. And yet, if you as a producer see something in it, a kernel of potential, it's worthwhile to you. And for me, I teach often and I work with educational initiative I co-founded called The Business of Broadway, where we have a class on creative development. And we actually talk about this very thing. And the thing that I feel so strongly is art is subjective. And how beautiful is that, right? Because everyone has their own taste. There's no such thing as good or bad. There is just more or less interesting to you personally. So the idea that something is not compelling to you as a producer, then you don't take it on. But if there is something in it that's calling you and you want to be able to suss it out, as it were, then you can go and get involved in that collaboration. And so the thing that I always see as foundational to being a creative producer, to being a producer, if you don't identify as one who is creative, to being an artist, to honestly being a human being in the world, is you have to articulate for yourself, what moves me? What kind of work, what kind of art do I gravitate toward? And you can recognize your own aesthetic. And whatever you love is exactly right for you, because it's all subjective, as I said, at the end of the day. And the thing that's really wonderful, if you really consider your formative, theater going experiences, for me as a person who works in this industry, what you'll find is the things that you loved and you still remember as oh, this was the show that made me want to get involved in theater. That taste doesn't change drastically. It will be refined and it will evolve, but on the whole, those are the things that sort of make up who you are as an artist and as a producer. And they inform whatever kind of work you're drawn to as you continue to grow in the industry. And so for me, I always think of it as, is there something in this that aesthetically connects with the kind of work I love? Is it in terms of the themes, in terms of the characters, in terms of the style or tone? And if there's something there that I find compelling and I can't get it out of my head, I'll go and investigate it and see, right? Because you also have to ensure that artist, if you're going to be working with a generative artist on a project, that they're willing to trust in a collaboration with you and hear you as an outside voice, because the producer is not the writer of the show, and willing to sort of think a little more expansively about what's possible for their show, and trust that the producer's idea for potential is worth exploring.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you very much, Rachel. And I just want to greet some of the great viewers who are tuning in. We have Brittany from Atlanta, Gaurav from India, Dee is here from Calgary, Julie's in the house from Las Vegas, Carolyn in Maryland. Oh, that's a nice rhyme. Begum from Turkey, Isabella from New Haven, Gladstone is here. We're so glad to have all of you guys and more. So please, say hi. Let us know where you're viewing from in the chat box. We're here with Rachel Sussman, Tony Award nominated producer. Now, Rachel, one of the challenges as a producer dealing with creative people, and this is certainly true in the corporate workplace as well, for people who are managers, is that oftentimes you might be in a situation where you feel like the artist in question, or the employee in question, is not necessarily going in the right direction. You feel like maybe they would be better served doing it a different way and approaching it somehow differently. But people get a little sensitive sometimes. It can be hard to have those conversations. I am curious what you have learned over time about the right way to be able to help steer a conversation when you feel like someone that you're working with is just going a little bit off course.
Dorie, that's a wonderful question. I mean, and this is sort of part of where my identification as a creative producer comes into play, because a creative producer is simply one who elects to participate in the creative process. That does not mean that a producer who doesn't call themselves a creative producer isn't creative. There is so much creativity regarded and needed when it comes to marketing and other sort of strategy. But the thing that I always think of as a creative producer is it's my job to get whatever's in an artist's head clear on the page, because often it's just they have a very clear sense as an artist of the story they want to tell, but sometimes that isn't being reflected yet. And so as a creative producer, I really think it's important to be asking more questions than I am offering answers, because if I'm offering answers, that's the version that I want to tell of the story versus the artist's. And if that were true, then I should, write it myself. And be asking these questions and, quite frankly, listening far more than anything else. My job is also to ensure that artists have benchmarks, right? When do we need to have a draft ready so that they have sort of a timeline laid out for them as to when work needs to be prepared. But for me, often just in that creative process, it's important to be thinking in this dramaturgical way, how are we clarifying the story? Who are these characters? What do we want to tell at the end of the day? And what are the elements to help us achieve that? But trying to really trust in that collaboration. And sometimes, unfortunately, those collaborations just aren't effective or successful, and there's tension. And when that happens, you as a producer and that artist need to reconcile, is this the right project for us to be working on together?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and well put. Thank you, Rachel. We are here for Newsweek's Better show, interviewing Rachel Sussman, Tony Award nominated producer. If you want to learn more about Rachel and her work, you can visit her website, rachel-sussman.com. Probably pretty confusingly for you and the rest of the world, I discovered it looks like probably less than a mile away from you, there's another well-known Rachel Sussman.
So funny that you say that, because there are two famous Rachel Sussmans. One is a therapist, and sometimes I get Google alerts for her, and I'm like, oh, actually, she gives a lot of really good advice. And there's also a very famous photographer named Rachel Sussman, and she and I have over the years gotten emails meant for the other, and so we've connected and sort of had this funny moment. And she's also in the arts, so it's been very funny, which is why I typically go by Suss, my last name, because also Rachel's very common, and my social media handles are Rach Suss, just to try and delineate from the other Rachel Sussmans out there.
It's true. Always a personal branding challenge sometimes. I have a few Dorie Clarks out there that I try to combat on a regular basis. There's a quilter. I try to make sure that quilter doesn't rise in the SEO ratings, keeping her down.
Oh, no quilting allowed.
No. There's one that sells grills in Maine. Nope, not going to hear from her. So anyway, we'd like to welcome some of the great folks who are tuning in here. We have Kristen from Dallas. We have Jen saying hi, and Marie. We have Valerie from the French Alps. That sounds nice. Maria's from Brooklyn. Vladana's also from Brooklyn. Joseph from Charlotte. Murdaka from Indonesia. Caio Cesar from Sao Paulo. We have a LinkedIn user from Pune. Oh my goodness, this is fantastic. Anna, welcome. So happy to have all of you here. And Rachel, something that I would love to ask about during the course of the pandemic, one of the things that frankly all of us have had to learn from and adapt to is being able to do things quickly. We don't have a lot of planning time. We have to think creatively and think on our feet. And so you were involved in a project that I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit more about. It was called the Saturday Night Seder. It made quite a splash. Can you explain a little bit what this was and how the heck you pulled it together as one of the, there was a team that were participating in this, but you were very involved in it. And this was a star-studded effort. Please tell us more about it and what you learned about acting fast amidst uncertainty.
Oh, absolutely. So the Saturday Night Seder, I'm so glad you brought it up because it is actually still Passover right now. And I've been reconnecting with our whole crew, and we've been doing a number of events to continue to raise money for the CDC Foundation. So the Saturday Night Seder began in, it aired in April of 2020, excuse me. And I got a call from Benj Pasek, who many of you may know. He is a brilliant composer of La La Land, Dear Evan Hansen. And he called me up. He's also Jewish. And he said, listen, I'm thinking about doing a Seder because his company StoryCourse had already produced a sort of like live interactive Seder event in the before times. And he said, I'm looking to get some producers involved to help me make this happen. Are you interested? And it was the first project that had sort of come my way that was intentionally looking to be digital. And I said, I know a little bit about the digital space. I'd love to learn more, sure. And it ended up being a retelling of the Passover story, which is the Exodus story, with all these extraordinary celebrities involved. Adina Menzel sang the 4 questions, and it was Billy Eichner and Richard Kind, and then a number of sort of like famously non-Jews who played Jews, like Josh Groban and Rachel Brosnahan. And they wrote a few original songs and performed. Shoshana Bean and Cynthia Erivo performed When You Believe from The Prince of Egypt. And it's about 70 minutes. It's on YouTube. You can still watch it. And it was a benefit for the CDC Foundation because we were so early. It's hard now to think about it, but looking back, we didn't know anything at the end of March, early April about the pandemic. There was so much that was unknown, and we didn't know when it would end. All we knew is we weren't supposed to gather for Passover, which is a holiday that you traditionally spend with your family and your community. And we felt, we can create community and connect people online. And I was one of a few producers on the project because I am. Not only do I work as a creative producer sort of in the storytelling with artists in early stages, I also do a lot of producing when it comes to the logistics. So I'm used to sort of structuring a story and figuring out how to ensure everyone has the same information and being like a hub of communication. And I was able to work with the writers and the editors and the other producers. And it was truly so scrappy. And it was these days, a lot of the agreements about how to go ahead and create a virtual event have been formalized. But this was in such early days. We were just like, we'll just, email our friends and see if they're interested. And so many of them said absolutely, because they weren't celebrating Passover with their families either. And the minute that they heard it was a benefit, everyone just donated their time to make it happen. And we've raised now over $3.5 million for the CDC Foundation, which continues, and we've put out an incredible amount of new content for Passover this year. The Seders were this past weekend, but we're still trying to elevate the Seder and the CDC Foundation. And if you go to SaturdayNightSeder.com, there's all this new content, recipes. I think you can see Fran Drescher's recipe for something, and she does the hand washing in the Seder. So it was such a delight. And for me, the first experience I had in the pandemic that made me feel like we can still create and we can still bring people together. And a number of those collaborators I started to work with and met on the Seder, I've continued to work with over the course of the pandemic, even though I haven't ever met them in person. So it's really, it ended up being a really beautiful sort of, let's put on a show together. We're just going to make it happen. And I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity to work on the Seder, and that it can live on and become a tradition, I hope, for years to come.
That's terrific. Thank you very much, Rachel. We are here with Rachel Sussman, Tony Award nominated producer. If you want to learn more about her, go to rachel-sussman.com. And if you want to make sure that you never miss one of our weekly interviews, go to DorieClark.com. You can sign up for my email list there and get a free self-assessment. Next week, we're going to be talking with Cal Newport, the well-known author of Deep Work, talking about email and the future of work. And please feel free to ask your questions for Rachel in the comments. We'd love to take your questions and hear what is on your mind. And in fact, one has already come in from Marie. And Marie wants to know, Rachel, something that's on everybody's mind. What do you think is next for Broadway as the industry looks to reopen?
Marie, this is such a good question. As I'm sure you've seen, there's been a lot of unknown for the Broadway industry and the Broadway League, which is the trade association that represents theater producers, theater owners, and general managers. They've been in this position of leadership and have been working this past year to figure out how can we safely reopen, how can we gather. As you may have read, because of the way that economics function for Broadway, it's very difficult for Broadway to reopen at less than 100% capacity potential, because otherwise there's just not a lot of revenue potential for a show. So Broadway is not opening until that's possible. Right now, the target for that is fall of 2021, which is only about 6 months away at this point. And I know for a fact that a number of producers and theater owners have taken this opportunity. It's really been a reckoning, not only in terms of, digital, having to come to terms with understanding and pivoting into this world of creating online, but also there was a massive racial reckoning. And to be able to look at this industry, which is, has been seen for so long as inaccessible to many people, and trying to now deeply consider how can we make this industry more equitable, more accessible. And a number of organizations like the Broadway Advocacy Coalition and the Industry Standard Group are working with big producers and with theater owners in conversation to really challenge the traditional structures of this industry, and to figure out ways in which we can create an industry that is really going to serve everyone.
Thank you, Rachel. That's great. Again, please ask your questions about identifying and nurturing creative projects or any Broadway or workplace adjacent question that you think Rachel Sussman can answer in the chat box. We're excited to see what's on your mind and to take your questions. And one came in, Rachel, from Anna, and I don't even know where you're going to take this, but I'm excited to see. She wants to know, how can a woman create a series of audacious takeovers during this chaotic era? Yeah, let's go there, Anna. Let's talk about audacious takeovers.
Oh
What
my
do you
God.
think of that, Rachel?
Anna, this is an extraordinary question. I think more than ever, the thing that I have found sort of such a struggle is hearing from a lot of my friends who have families, who are mothers, and how they've had to step back from their work lives in order to not only be at home working, but also taking care of their family or their children, which is like, of course, we know such a construct of, you know, what a woman's position should be in a family. And I've also, so like, that's one of the end of the spectrum. And there have been all these studies that have come out saying like, you know, women are stepping back from the work life. And then I also see all these women who are taking executive leadership courses and going to get their MBAs online and really taking this time as an opportunity to expand their skill sets. To learn more about the world and also like the things that interest them. I mean, me, for example, the thing I do, which is produce live theater, cannot happen right now. So I have been building out this educational initiative, the Business of Broadway. I've been teaching at Columbia. I pivoted into working in the digital space. And I really think that it's about reframing, you know, this moment of despair into one of audacious opportunity and trying to figure out the ways in which you personally, you know, what are the things that you love that you haven't yet had a moment to take advantage of? And is this the time to do it?
Really interesting. Thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Anna, for the question. Another great one came in, Rachel, from Annette. She wants to know, Rachel, have you had any personal creative reckonings that you'd be willing to share? You seem so well informed through these challenges of the pandemic. Of course, you know, we all know everyone has had their stressors. So how has this period been for you? And would you say that you've had any personal creative reckonings?
I would, you know, I have a project, which I've been a new musical, which I've been developing for now about 7 years. It was a project that I conceived of when I was in middle school. It's about the American women's suffrage movement. And I've been working on it steadily, and it's sort of brought on all these incredible collaborators. And the show was set to premiere in the fall of 2020. And it had been it had been so momentous for us when we got the news. We had worked so hard and it felt like all of our efforts were paying off and we had this production and we couldn't wait to finally share this work with the world. And then everything shut down in March. And initially we thought, well, like this will only be temporary. This won't affect us doing a show in the fall of 2020. Of course it did. You know, it was a show that really felt like we wanted to meet this moment of the election and also the centennial of the suffrage amendment. The 19th Amendment was signed into law in August of 2020. And the idea that our show would be happening around the same time, it felt so relevant. And that didn't.
It was such a good theory.
It was such a good theory. And in hindsight, you know, thinking about, you know, maybe that happened in some alternate reality, but in this reality, the election, I feel like took up so much of everyone's time and energy, and including my own, that I feel like would the show have been overshadowed? And of course it couldn't have happened. And we don't know what the election would have looked like in that alternate timeline. But that show just, you know, we had to stop our timeline, that process that I was saying earlier. You know, you work with your creative team and you put together a timeline and everyone's working toward it with all these artistic benchmarks, and all that stopped. And as a producer, you know, you're the leader, the creative leader of the ship. And folks look to you and they go, okay, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to pivot? And I didn't have any answers. And that was a reckoning. And to this day, I mean, we have much more clarity. The show is going to happen. It's just, there's still so much unknown about exactly when. However, I feel like it was for me both a creative and a personal reckoning as a person who is often in that position of leadership to say, I actually don't know. And to allow myself to be that honest, because so much of collaboration is based on transparency. And instead of saying, well, we're working and we're going to try and make this and that happen. And then if none of that had come true, I wouldn't have wanted my creatives to feel like I hadn't managed their expectations appropriately, because that's my job at the end of the day. And that was a real struggle to say, I don't know, and to still not know, but we've come out, here we are, a year into the pandemic, and now having a little bit more clarity, I can tell you that show will happen. It will be at the Public Theater, and it hopefully we'll know more about exactly when soon.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. I think a lot of folks, certainly in the theatrical and creative world, but also the business world, can really relate to that feeling of wanting to be able to give guidance and clarity to your employees, and just sometimes not being able to if you don't know the answers, and finding a way to exist within that uncertainty. So thank you for sharing that. Again, we're here with Rachel Sussman. You can learn more about her here, rachel-sussman.com. And if you want to make sure you never miss one of these weekly Thursday shows, follow me on LinkedIn. Go to dorieclark.com/LinkedIn and you will get notifications about it. You can sign up for my LinkedIn newsletter there. So we have time for probably just a couple more questions, Rachel. A great one came in. I know you're passionate about LGBT issues. Angie wants to know, what are some ways people are working to increase trans visibility and representation in theater or stage? Do you have any quick thoughts or comments about that?
Well, I can say that I have a producing partner who I actually worked with as a co-producer on What the Constitution Means to Me, JJ Maley, who's an extraordinary artist. And they are really working actively in the space as a multi-hyphenated artist, which I also applaud so much. I feel like folks were multi-hyphenated prior to the pandemic, but now it's become so much more normalized that, of course, you're not just a producer or just a director or just an actor. You can do it all, and why wouldn't you? And so they've been working very actively in the space, as well as the extraordinary director, artistic director, activist leader, Shakina Nafak, who had her play, The Butterfly Club, just nominated for a Drama League Award. It was supposed to be at Williamstown, and it stars an almost entirely trans female cast. And it was, instead of premiering at Williamstown because of the shutdown, they pivoted and created an audio version of the play, which was produced by Audible. And you can actually listen to it. And Shakina is an extraordinary artist who is actually actively working. And yesterday, of course, was Trans Visibility Day. And she has put out a lot of tools in terms of how to donate and where to go to help promote trans visibility, and also elevate trans artists who are working in the theatrical space.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And I've actually listened on Audible to Shakina's play, which is terrific. So good shout out. And I think we probably have time for one more question, Rachel. Let's hear from Gina Cox. Gina says that she's a fan of storytelling, but she is hindered, sadly, by all of the wonderful letters after her name. And she tends to speak in academic language. Any tips for sourcing stories quickly, or perhaps just becoming that much better at knowing how to tell them? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something that I sort of live by in our Business of Broadway School of Thought is this idea of ABS, which is always be scouting. And we mean that both in terms of work, content, but also artists, because there's no way of really knowing when inspiration is going to strike. So I think back to what I had said earlier, once you have a lot of clarity for yourself, of your own personal aesthetic, and are able to take a moment to really consider, what story do I want to tell? What are the stories that I feel like need to be told, that I am sort of the conduit as a producer for helping to bring to life? If you're able to sort of ask that question and then to use that as a lens for which starting to scout, it will help to really distill for you the kinds of projects and the kinds of artists that you personally want to be working with.
Fantastic. Rachel Sussman, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Again, we're here with Rachel Sussman, Tony Award nominated producer. You can learn more right here, and make sure you never miss one of our weekly Better series by following me at dorieclark.com/LI for LinkedIn. And thank you all for tuning in. Rachel, we're so pleased to have you here.
Thank you, Dorie. It was so wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone, and we will see you next Thursday.